Get out, now, and don't you ever come back. I will never forget the look in his eyes that night, cold, smug, and dripping with contempt, as he pointed straight at me in the middle of a ballroom glowing like something out of a movie. Get out, now, and don't you ever come back. His voice rang out, sharp and deliberate, with zero effort to lower it, even though we were surrounded by VIP guests. A few turned their heads. Some looked away. The rest? They smirked. Hey guys, my name's Marcus. I'm 34, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I work as a waiter at one of the most high-end restaurants in the city. Not because I can't do anything else, but because I've been laying low. I'll explain that part later. Back to that night. The banquet room looked like Versailles, pure gold and crystal, glittering from wall to wall. VIPs from all over the country had flown in for the grand opening of our newest location in the Veritas chain. That's where I worked. I was assigned as the lead server for the VIP section. Handpicked, actually, because I consistently got top marks for service and professionalism. But that night, one spilled glass of wine, one mistake, was all it took to unravel everything. It splashed onto a woman's dress. I immediately bent down to apologize. Before I could even stand back up, I heard the manager's voice cutting through the chatter. Oh God, why do I even let people like you near money? People like me? He meant black. He meant poor. He meant invisible. I stood up, ready to say something, but he snatched the towel from my hands and pointed a finger in my face like I was a roach he just found in the kitchen. You're fired. Get out. There's no place here for sloppiness or low-class behavior. I felt every eye in that room land on me. My heartbeat paused. And listen, I'm not someone who breaks down easily. Words don't usually shake me. But what gutted me wasn't the insult. It was the laughter, the cold little chuckles from a few guests, and the silence from everyone else, even the ones who used to greet me like a friend. No one spoke up, not a single person. I turned and walked out. No explanations, no shouting. I could hear cameras clicking, people whispering. Somebody was live streaming, and I'm pretty sure that clip started going viral before I even made it to the exit. Have you ever been publicly humiliated, and all you could do was stand there burning with shame, hands shaking, trying not to cry? That night I walked the freezing streets of Atlanta, hands still wet with red wine. I looked up at the sky and smiled. A strange smile, almost satisfied. Because the man who just fired me, he had no idea he just unlocked the gates of hell for himself. No one in that ballroom knew who I really was, and no one could have guessed that just a few days later, his whole life would flip upside down because of that stupid decision. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Aren't you a little curious why someone like me, a black waiter, humiliated in front of a room full of rich people, could still smile like that? And why I said, he didn't know who I was? Trust me, this is only the beginning. That night I didn't go home. Instead, I found myself at this old, half-forgotten bar, tucked beneath the Marietta Bridge. The kind of place where no one knows your name, no one's live streaming, and no one bats an eye at a black man sitting alone with a glass of bourbon. And the ironic part? Even after being humiliated in front of a ballroom full of elites, I felt lighter, like I could finally breathe again. Because for the first time in 2 years, I had a reason to take off the mask I'd been wearing. You see, I wasn't always a waiter. 10 years ago, I was a rising name in the tech investment scene in San Francisco. One of the youngest strategic advisors at Avalon Ventures, a billion-dollar investment firm. I was on the cover of Forbes 30 Under 30. I orchestrated a $500 million merger between two powerhouse startups. I had a penthouse in the Mission District, drove a Porsche 911, and even spoke at TEDx. Then I disappeared. No scandal, no accident. I just walked away. I left the money, the press, the deals, all of it. After one personal tragedy broke me. My brother died. Jalen was during a morning jog by police in a wealthy neighborhood. They said he was acting suspicious. No warning, no questions, just bullets. And they guessed wrong. What followed was a nightmare. I fought for justice, filed reports, tried to bring in lawyers, but no one wanted to touch the case. My family unraveled. I lost faith in the system. Eventually, I gave up everything. I left Silicon Valley, moved to Atlanta, and started living a life that made me invisible. No one here knew who I used to be. I took on manual jobs, barista, janitor, Uber driver, and finally a waiter at Veritas. Why waiting tables? Because it forced me to observe people closely. I wanted to understand how society measures worth, in glances, in posture, in tone. I had once lived at the top, where people bowed to you just because you had a fat portfolio. Now I lived at the bottom, where people barked orders because they assumed you were nobody. And I had seen men like that manager before, hiding behind a title, playing professional, when really he was just another polished bigot who felt powerful tearing down anyone who didn't look like him. But what he didn't know, while he was flexing his tiny authority to humiliate me, I was sitting on a weapon he couldn't even see: information. A few weeks earlier, during a staff party, I'd overheard a conversation between shareholders. One of them let it slip that the parent company behind Veritas was in trouble, serious financial trouble, and they were scrambling for new investors to keep the whole restaurant chain alive. I remembered every word: who held power, who was selling shares, who looked like a weak link. I've managed hundreds of high-stakes deals. I know exactly what a collapsing company looks like. And Veritas, it was teetering on the edge. All I needed was a reason to make my move. And tonight, he gave me the perfect one. I pulled out my phone. On the screen was a secure app, a venture capital platform most people don't even know exists. I still had access through a shadow profile I built last year. I typed a short message: considering reinvestment in Atlanta-based restaurant chain, full operational control required upon majority acquisition. I sent it to an old partner. I knew he'd respond within hours. Now you might think I was about to go on some loud revenge spree. Nah. I've been in rooms with real sharks, people who can end a company with a single phone call. I know how to dismantle an empire without making a sound. So the question isn't, should I get revenge? The question is, what should I make him lose first? My phone buzzed. A reply from the partner: interested. Call me in the morning. I leaned back, took the final sip of my bourbon. Tonight I was just a fired waiter. But tomorrow, I'd be the one rewriting the fate of the empire he thought he ruled. The next morning I showed up earlier than usual, not to work, but to watch. Veritas opened at 11. I was parked down the block from the back entrance by 9:30, just in time to see the staff trickling in. There was Tanya, the sous chef from Haiti, walking in with her neatly wrapped lunchbox, still greeting every single person she passed with quiet grace, even though barely anyone ever returned the gesture. Then Mark came in, the young Latino server, scrolling through texts while juggling his apron. Management always jumped on him for being on his phone, even though he worked harder than half the floor combined. And then I saw him, Gerald Voss, general manager of Veritas, the man who humiliated me in front of a ballroom full of elites for the crime of being black and treating a guest like a human being. He climbed out of his new model Lexus SUV, wrapped in a charcoal gray suit too tight for his bloated ego. Eyes glued to his phone, blind to the world around him. No one greeted him. He greeted no one. Gerald was the kind of man who only bowed to people who could take his job away, and he never imagined I might be one of them. I pulled out my phone and dialed. "You nearby?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. "I'm outside Veritas now," came the deep, steady voice of Gregory Shin, head of Ardent Equity, a private equity firm expanding into high-end dining. I stepped out of the car and waved him over. He shook my hand, eyebrows raised. "You sure about this deal, Marcus?" I nodded. "More than sure. This place is a gold mine, if we put the right hands on the wheel." Gregory chuckled. "Man, I'm still not used to calling you Marcus. Back in the valley, they knew you as the shadow broker." I smirked. "Let's just say I've gotten used to people forgetting that name." We walked in through the back entrance, just like any regular staff member. I gave Gregory the kitchen tour, introduced Tanya and Mark as non-negotiables, untouchable, no matter what changes were coming. Then I asked to see Gerald. He came out with a puzzled look. "I thought you were fired." I smiled. "We'll get to that in a second." I pulled out a chair and gestured for him to sit. Gregory stood quietly behind me, arms folded. I'm not here to ask for my job back, I began. I'm here to inform you that, as of this morning, Ardent Equity now owns 61% of Veritas's parent company. Gerald paled. What? That's not. Who would have sold? I slid a stack of documents onto the table. 3 of the largest shareholders, including your former boss, agreed to sell within 48 hours of my offer. They don't believe you're the man to turn this ship around, Gerald. His hands trembled. His lips pressed into a thin line. I had no idea this was even in motion. I shrugged. Maybe you were too busy firing black employees in front of VIP guests. The silence that followed was loud, like a slap with no sound. I was just upholding standards, he stammered, darting a glance at Gregory. He was being unprofessional. I didn't know who he was. Gregory leaned in slightly. Well, now you do. I stood, pulled out an envelope. This is your formal termination, effective immediately. You can walk out on your own, or we can have security walk you out. Gerald froze. For one flicker of a second, I saw the change in his eyes, confidence slipping into confusion, and finally into dread. He stood, lifted his chin like he still had some dignity left. You'll regret letting a waiter run this place. I watched him walk off, then turned to Gregory. Not a waiter, I said. A man who built 3 companies 10 times the size of this one. Gregory patted my shoulder, smiling. I guess tonight we're finally going to have a peaceful dinner with the VIPs. I nodded. And this time I'll be serving them myself. Not because I have to, but because I want them to see what real professionalism looks like. The question in my head that morning wasn't, how will I get revenge? It was, what will I turn this place into, now that it's in my hands? That night, I stood once again in the grand lobby of Veritas. But this time, I wasn't the guy who just got fired. I was the representative of Ardent Equity, now the majority stakeholder of the entire Veritas restaurant group. And more importantly, I was the final decision maker on staffing, strategy, direction, and I was waiting for the very VIP guests who, just yesterday, had unknowingly triggered Gerald's humiliating little power trip. I chose to serve them tonight, not for revenge, but to plant doubt, to make them wonder, why is the guy who waited our table yesterday running the whole damn place today? And to remind them, never judge a person by the apron they wear. At 6:30 p.m., the glass doors swung open. 3 suited men walked in, flanked by a woman in a sharp red dress, Monica Graves and her team from Callister Group, a major investment firm scouting upscale restaurant chains for acquisition. I stepped forward, calm and composed. Welcome back to Veritas. I'm Marcus. I'll be your host this evening. All 4 of them froze. The bald guy, the same one who'd snapped his fingers at me yesterday and said, "Hey, waiter," stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Wait, you're that guy from last night? I nodded politely. Yes, and tonight I'm the one making sure your dinner runs without any unfortunate incidents. Monica watched me closely. She didn't say a word, but I saw it, the moment she noticed the shift. Yesterday I was just another polite employee. Tonight I owned the room. I guided them to their table, introduced the newly updated menu, recipes I personally approved that morning. Everything ran smoothly, not a single misstep, until Monica leaned in. So Marcus, who exactly are you in this restaurant? I smiled. I'm the one who convinced Ardent Equity to restructure the entire Veritas Group. And I chose to start right here, by personally serving the people who, until yesterday, assumed I was just a waiter. The bald man gave a stiff chuckle. Well, this is certainly a surprise. I tilted my head. Surprise is the key ingredient in every sweet revenge, don't you think? The table went quiet. Then came the laughter. Polite, slightly nervous, the kind people use when they realize something isn't a joke, but laugh anyway. I stepped away, giving them space to eat in peace. But before I left, I slid a small note in front of Monica. Next time, watch how someone treats people beneath them. That's who they really are. By 9 p.m., the dinner was done. They stood up to leave one by one. Monica was the last. She looked at me, eyes unreadable. We'll be in touch soon, Marcus. I nodded. I'll be ready. A few of the newer staff watched me pass with wide eyes, some with awe, some with confusion. Tanya whispered to Mark, "I thought he was just a temp." Mark nodded slowly. "He's not temporary. He's the long game." I returned to the manager's office, now my office, where I just signed off on staff realignments and a major overhaul of internal systems. On the desk, dossiers from every other Veritas branch, all waiting for my visit. But even with justice served, a bitter taste still lingered. Not because of Gerald, but because the system let people like him thrive for so long. I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder titled Phase 2. A list came up. Restaurants across the country with flagged histories. Reports of racial bias, discrimination, abuse. Most were never investigated. Each name was a story waiting to be told. And I planned to tell them in a way no one could ignore. How many more Geralds were out there, still holding power? How many more staff dismissed, overlooked, belittled, just because of where they came from or the color of their skin? I wasn't alone anymore. And I knew one thing for sure. The fight had only just begun. The next morning I received an email. No subject, no sender, just one chilling sentence. "I know who you are, but don't think money means you own everything." No name, no trail, just a raw, naked threat, cold and eerily familiar. I leaned back in my office chair, eyes locked on the screen. The chill crawling down my spine wasn't fear. It was the weight of something I'd trained myself to face. Truth always comes with risk. At first, exposing Gerald had felt like a clean win, a swift takedown of a racist manager wrapped with poetic justice. But now, I was beginning to see the web I had disturbed was much darker and far wider. Gerald wasn't working alone, and what I'd found in the HR files, that was just the tip of the iceberg. Before Ardent Equity bought Veritas, the system was a maze of manipulation where managers could alter evaluations, sideline black and brown employees from promotions, and hide behind vague phrases like internal misalignment. I needed evidence. I needed someone from the old guard, someone who had seen it happen, or better yet, Gerald himself. By midday, I walked into Gerald's old restaurant. The new management had replaced most of the staff, but a few familiar faces remained, including Luis, one of the kitchen veterans. He saw me and gave a respectful nod, but his eyes were wary. I got straight to the point. "Luis, I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to know, who was really behind the pattern of sidelining employees of color from promotions over the past 3 years?" He hesitated. "I don't know anything." I locked eyes with him. "If you stay silent, you're part of it. And when it all goes down, it's going to take you with it." Luis swallowed hard. Then finally his voice dropped. "It wasn't just Gerald. The old regional guys, especially one named Harlan Eastwick, they were the ones pulling the strings. They'd drop comments like, VIP tables shouldn't be served by certain types, or management needs to reflect the brand's image." Never said outright, but everyone knew what they meant. That name, Harlan Eastwick. I'd seen it before in an operations report last month. Nothing flagged. Of course not. The man clearly knew how to cover his tracks. Back in my office, I pulled every archived email between Gerald and Harlan. It didn't take long before the code started to crack. The new kid doesn't quite fit the VIP look. Switch his shift. Regulars won't appreciate someone less polished. Maintain the premium image. You know what I mean. Oh, I knew exactly what he meant. And I knew something else. If this ever went public, Veritas would be staring down a full-blown national scandal. The question was, should I let that happen? With my authority, I could force Harlan into quiet resignation, handle it internally, keep Ardent's name clean, sweep it under the velvet rug. But if I stayed silent, how many more people like me would get fired, humiliated, or pushed to the sidelines for simply not fitting the brand? Number. This called for something louder, a public reckoning. I picked up my phone and dialed someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Lauren Myers, veteran reporter at the Chicago Globe. She'd followed my story back when I was just that black kid coding to survive. "Lauren," I said, "I've got something, and I think America needs to hear it." She didn't miss a beat. "Meet me tonight. Bring everything." This wasn't about Gerald anymore. It was about a system that had hidden behind polished smiles and curated menus while quietly filtering out anyone who didn't fit. I had once been a victim of that system. Now I was holding the light. And here's the thing about light. It doesn't argue with darkness. It just shows up and reveals what's been there all along. I had lived in that darkness long enough to know, if no one stands up, it swallows everything. We met at a dim little cafe on the outskirts of Chicago, the kind of place where the yellow lights made everything feel foggy and private. Lauren hadn't changed. Hair tied back, notebook in one hand, pen in the other, like every word might be tomorrow's headline. "I knew it was big the second you called," she said, skipping the small talk, "but I didn't realize it ran this deep." I laid it all out on the table: printed email chains, HR rejection lists, cross-referenced files of every black and brown employee who had been mysteriously demoted, transferred, or let go over the past 3 years. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the whole night building the case. "There are 38 cases here," I said, "and that's just from 2 branches. There are 17 more across the country. What do you think we'd find there?" Lauren flipped through the pages, her expression turning colder with each one. "Do I have your permission to go public with this?" she asked quietly. "You know, once it's out, there's no putting it back in the box." I paused. Truthfully, I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I walked into Ardent. I want accountability, not just for Gerald, but for Harlan and everyone who hid behind people like them. And I want the system to know, we're done staying silent. She nodded. "All right, but I need you in the story." "You mean like with my real name?" "Not necessarily, but your face?" "Yeah, people need to know you're real." I looked out the window. Everything I'd worked to keep quiet, to keep safe, was about to be laid bare. But some things, they just don't deserve the shadows anymore. "I'll be in it," I said, "but let me be the one to tell it." 2 days later, it hit the front page of the Chicago Globe. The waiter in the mirror, exposing racism in America's fine dining industry. It exploded, not just because the truth had come out, but because the whistleblower was one of Ardent's own major investors. The internet lit up. Not just a waiter trended across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Millions of shares, thousands of testimonials. People dug into Gerald's past, Harlan's hiring patterns, internal interview stats showing black applicants being rejected at twice the rate of their white peers. Major outlets like CNN, the New York Times, even the BBC picked up the story. And then I got an email. Short, serious. "We need to talk, immediately. Lucinda Raleigh, CEO of Ardent." The meeting happened within 24 hours. The conference room felt like a courtroom. Tension so thick you could slice it. Harlan was there, but the swagger was gone. He sat stiff, fists clenched under the table. Lucinda looked me in the eye. "I'm not going to ask why you did it," she said. "I just want to know, what do you want?" I didn't hesitate. "I want change, not a PR statement. Real policy, transparent hiring, a clear path to promotion, and an independent oversight board to investigate any future claims of discrimination." Lucinda was quiet for a beat. Then she turned to Harlan. "I'm asking for your immediate resignation. And if we find even a shred of evidence that you interfered with hiring practices, Ardent will fully cooperate with law enforcement." Harlan shot up, voice cracking into a snarl. "We're talking about a damn waiter, and you're going to let him tear this place down?" Lucinda didn't flinch. She turned to security. "Escort him out." I didn't watch him leave. I just closed my eyes for a second, because I knew I had just done something I once believed was impossible. I wasn't that kid who got fired for being black anymore. I wasn't the guy hiding behind an apron. I was the man who forced a billion-dollar company to look itself in the mirror. But it wasn't over. That night I got a phone call, no caller ID. A deep, raspy voice on the other end. "Impressive, but did you really think it was just Gerald and Harlan?" I said nothing. "You're playing a much bigger game than you realize, and I won't let you finish it." I asked, "Who are you?" But the line went dead. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. There was still someone out there, someone bigger, more powerful, pulling strings I hadn't even seen yet. And I knew one thing for sure. The real fight had only just begun. I've lived with threats before. Being a black man in finance and then in fine dining, you learn to recognize them. Some are subtle, like side eyes and cold shoulders. Others are loud, whispers behind your back, warnings wrapped in fake smiles. But this one? This wasn't a threat to shut me up. It was a declaration of war. Someone was watching me, and that someone held real power. I told Lauren about the call. She froze for a beat. "Who do you think it was?" "I don't know," I said. "But it wasn't Gerald. Voice didn't match, and he's too much of a coward to speak in riddles." She opened her laptop and started typing. "I'll dig into Ardent's financials, see which investors stand to lose the most." I nodded. "And I'm going back to the restaurant." Lauren looked at me like I'd just volunteered to walk into a lion's den. "You're what?" "I need to face them. The ones who watched, the ones who stayed quiet, and the ones still scared. They need to know. Not every black man in the kitchen is just there to cook." I showed up right at the dinner rush. Front of house was manned by a new hostess, a young Asian woman, looking more nervous than I ever did on my first shift. "Hi, do you have a reservation?" she asked politely. "I'm here to see the shift manager." A few minutes later, Jacob walked out. Jacob was the one person at Ardent who had never treated me like less. Not friendly, but fair. His wife was Dominican. Their daughter had been bullied for the color of her skin. He understood. He saw me and didn't flinch. "I figured you'd come back. Thanks for not saying, I thought I'd never see you again." I smiled. He gave a slow nod. "You shook the place up, but some folks around here, they're finally waking up." Inside, the air felt different. Old co-workers avoided eye contact. A few gave tight, guilty nods. Even silence now carried the weight of a debt. One of the newer hires, a young girl with brown skin and perfectly parted cornrows, looked at me like I'd stepped off a Marvel movie set. I gathered the waitstaff in the break room. Only a few were brave enough to sit. The rest lingered near the door, listening from the shadows. "I didn't come back to start a riot," I said clearly. "I came back to remind you, silence has a price, and this time everyone will pay it." Then came a voice I hadn't heard in a while. "Mark. He used to be my closest friend here. You did what I never had the guts to do," he said. "But now what? You really think things will change? They'll slap a few slogans on the walls, hire a couple more black folks, and call it progress." "No, Mark," I said, locking eyes with him. "Because I'm not stopping at a news story. I'm building my own restaurant group, and I'm making space for every person this system ever pushed out." The room went still. Then someone asked the obvious question. "You planning to compete with Ardent?" "No," I replied. "I'm planning to replace them." A few days later, Lauren called. "I found something," she said. "There's an investment fund, Wexford and Keene. They've put over $70 million into Ardent. And guess what?" I waited. The CEO of Wexford is Lucinda Rawley's ex-father-in-law. I frowned. Meaning if Ardent tanks, Wexford bleeds out. And Alfred Keene, he's not the kind of man who lets anyone screw with his money. I thought back to the voice on the phone. Gravelly, calm, dangerous. Was that him? Could be, or someone working for him. But listen, I got something else. She sent me an audio file, a secret recording from inside a Wexford boardroom, sourced from someone anonymous. I hit play. Alfred Keene's voice came through, deep and steely. "If that kid keeps stirring the pot, and we shut him down. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, whatever it takes. He doesn't get to become a symbol." I gripped my phone until my knuckles ached. This wasn't just about Gerald anymore. I'd rattled a hornet's nest, one built on billions of dollars, entrenched power, and a system ready to burn anyone who questioned it. And I knew then there was only one way forward. Step up, don't flinch, and never, ever apologize. Lauren warned me. From now on, everything you do will be watched. One wrong move, and they'll crush you. Not in the media, but legally. You get that? I got it, and I was ready. I'm no fool. Justice doesn't always win. The world runs on power, money, and connections. But I also know there are cracks in the system. Small openings where an outsider can slip through if they know how to work it. I reached out to an old contact. Alan, an investigative reporter known for exposing corporate scandals. We'd worked together back when I was a Wall Street analyst. I'd helped him expose a CEO laundering money through charity funds. He wasn't surprised to hear from me. "I've got something you'll like," I said, straight to the point. "You always bring trouble, Marcus. This time, it's a full-on party, not just trouble." We met at a small bar in Soho. I played him the Wexford recording, handed over all the files Lauren had gathered, the shadowy ties between Arden, Wexford, and Keene, and their cover-up of systemic racism, wrongful firings, and the use of black employees as props in PR campaigns to pacify public outrage. Alan was silent for a long moment. "You know this is a nuclear bomb, right?" "I'm not just dropping a bomb," I said. "I want it to blow up at the right time, in the right place, and for everyone to see." A few days later, the first investigative piece went live. Headlines screaming, "Inside the fake culinary empire, the rot beneath Arden's glamour." I didn't put my name on it, but every word was mine. The fallout was seismic. Arden's stock dropped 11% in the first 48 hours. The board called an emergency meeting. Media outlets ran the story nonstop. Social media blew up with hashtag boycott Arden. Gerald got suspended. For now. But I knew he wasn't done. I had one more card to play. In an old conversation, Gerald had casually mentioned a private party with some VIPs. At the time, I just laughed it off. But Lauren dug up a recording I'd made, something I'd done without thinking. Now a lifeline. On the tape, Gerald said, "That party? Just some decorators. A few black people hired by the hour to stand in photos. I don't even know their names." Lauren edited that clip together with photos from Arden's so-called diversity campaign. 3 black faces posing as chefs, but none actually worked there. They were models hired from an agency. We handed all that evidence to Alan. The next article was ready to drop. This time I signed it. Marcus Ellison, former employee, ex-financial analyst, survivor. On the day Article 2 published, I went back to Arden, not to protest, not to apologize, but to hand out invitations. "This is an invite," I told Jacob and a few old waiters, "to the launch of my new restaurant chain. The name, Foundry, The Forge. Our motto, we don't just cook, we reshape every stereotype." The spot was a renovated industrial space in Brooklyn. I partnered with chefs who'd been pushed out of Arden for not fitting the image. All black, immigrant, LGBTQ+. Those the system cast aside. I looked around at my team, people who'd been excluded, now building something stronger than any system that tried to hold them down. The opening was 6 days after the second story dropped. That night, CNN, the New York Times, BuzzFeed, all had cameras there. A line of customers stretched down the block. I stepped onto the small stage in the main hall, mic in hand. I wasn't just a former waiter anymore. I was a living story. I was fired from a restaurant, right in front of the people who mattered most. Not because I did anything wrong, but because my skin was the wrong color. I paused. The room was dead silent. But I'm not here to play the victim. I'm here to say, when you build a house on discrimination, it will fall. And from the rubble, we build back, with truth, talent, and dignity. The crowd rose, applauding. But then I saw him, a familiar face in the crowd, a man in a gray coat, powerful, cold, Alfred Keene. He didn't clap, just stared at me, judging whether I was a nuisance or a real threat. And I knew this game was far from over. After the grand opening, everything hit like a storm. The media hailed Foundry as a symbol of rebirth and resistance. Reservations booked solid for a month. But I knew every step ahead would be a battle. 3 days later, Lauren called. "Keene's fighting back," she said, urgency in her voice. "They've hired a crisis PR firm. They're digging into your past, lawsuits, old posts, any slip-up. There's nothing there. Marcus, you worked in finance. Nothing's impossible if they want to make it up." I understood. The classic play, smear the whistleblower's reputation, seed enough doubt in the public's mind, and the outrage fizzles out. Then they rise again like nothing happened. I met Alan in a cafe in Tribeca. "I know they're prepping a counterattack," I said. "And you want what? To get ahead of it?" Alan gave a dry laugh. "Confession time?" "Number, I want to tell the truth. about my past, the finance world, nearly being prosecuted for testifying against my old company. All of it, but on my terms. Alan nodded slowly. You realize if you do that, some will believe you, some won't. As long as they know I'm not hiding anything, and I'm not afraid. The interview aired on Behind the Mask, a top investigative podcast. I opened up about my past, once the golden boy of Wall Street, threatened when I blew the whistle, then turning to food as a way to find kindness again. I shared the shameful parts, ambition, arrogance, fear of failing. Do you regret it? The host asked. I don't regret speaking the truth. I just wish I hadn't stayed silent for so long. The story struck a nerve, spreading faster than I imagined. People didn't just stand with me. They saw themselves. Those oppressed, silenced, broken by fear of losing what little they had. And then something no one expected happened. An anonymous former senior Wexford employee sent Lauren a package. Inside, documents revealing a secret contract between Ardent and an international restaurant chain in Qatar, one notorious for migrant labor abuses. Ardent had been hiding that it imported ingredients through a shell company indirectly owned by Keane. This wasn't just ethics or racism anymore. It was federal crime. Lauren barely believed her eyes. This is the smoking gun. We immediately handed everything to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, along with financial records I'd accessed during my time as an analyst for one of Keane's subsidiaries. This was the endgame. 3 weeks later, Gerald was grilled by the FBI. 2 months after, Alfred Keane was officially under investigation. Assets frozen. His empire crumbled in a few headlines. But I didn't celebrate. No champagne popped. I just went to the foundry kitchen, sat by the hearth. Watched the glowing fire reflect off hands that once poured wine, once dropped from shame, once clenched in despair. Now those hands cooked for a Syrian immigrant kid, grinning wide at his first ever strawberry pancakes. I realized this was no longer revenge. I had won. But real victory isn't when the enemy falls. It's when you stand tall. A week later, I got an invite from TED. They wanted me to share my story in Vancouver. Not about revenge, about recovery. I said yes, because I'm no longer the fired waiter at a party. I'm the storyteller now. And this time, I hold the mic. The stage lights dimmed. I stepped out into the TEDx auditorium in Vancouver, facing hundreds of expectant eyes. My heart wasn't pounding like it was the first time I waited tables in Manhattan. No shaking hands like when I was humiliated in front of VIPs. No bitterness like the nights I sat alone in my empty apartment, chewing on the truth that I was nobody with no one watching my back. I stood there as a whole person, no armor, no masks. I started with a simple sentence. I was once fired because of the color of my skin. The room seemed as still. I told them about that night at Ardent, about Gerald's cold stare, the whispered words I overheard in the kitchen. He's just temp staff. Don't let him kill the vibe. People like him don't belong here. But I wasn't just telling my pain. I was telling the pain of everyone who's ever been erased from the room, made invisible, forced to apologize for simply existing. I shared the slide down, the job lost, the dignity stolen, the faith shattered. Then I spoke about the ones who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Lauren, Dr. Martinez, Mr. Park, people who didn't care about who I was but saw who I was trying to become. And then, Foundry, the boy from Nigeria holding a potato peeler for the first time, the Haitian girl crying tears of joy after baking her first soft loaf in 3 weeks. A Mexican mother telling me, "You're not just teaching my child to cook. You're teaching him to believe in tomorrow." The room was silent. I noticed someone wiping away a tear. I closed with a line I'd written during my darkest days in that tiny apartment. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is choosing not to let pain define you anymore. After the talk, my phone flooded with messages. From a white woman fired for reporting harassment. From a Chinese-American chef of 20 years. Never called by his real name. From a queer teen kicked out for daring to live honestly. I realized my story wasn't just about a black man fired from a job. It was the story of anyone who's ever been told they're not enough. I launched a culinary apprenticeship called Second Flame. a chance to light the fire again for immigrants and people with past convictions. 3 months later, Gerald Keane was sentenced to 3 years probation and ordered to pay nearly $2 million in restitution. Ardent shut down forever. The marble walls replaced by exposed brick and open space. Foundry 2 opened on Ardent's old site. I wasn't at that opening. I was in class, teaching a new group how to feel heat through their fingertips. But when they succeeded, the whole kitchen erupted in applause. And I knew the man who was once fired had built a place where no one gets left behind. I didn't start this journey to get revenge. I just wanted to be seen as a whole person, flawed and worthy of a second chance. But that worst night of my life, it was the first fire. It burned away every illusion, every false sense of safety. It forced me to face myself, my pride, my fears, and the question, who am I without a title, without the respect of others? The answer didn't come easy, but when it did, it set me free. I am Marcus, a black man, a man who's failed, a chef, a teacher, a survivor. And I learned that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strength to rise above hate and build something no one can break. Belief in yourself. If you're at the bottom, knocked down, humiliated, don't think it's the end. Maybe you're just standing before your own first fire. And if you have the courage to walk through it, on the other side, there's the light.